you've made it. The road's long, but you've finally found your way to me. You think motels are just stops along the way. A bed, a shower, a little peace before you continue your journey. But not all rooms are as empty as they seem. Some are already occupied by things you'll never see coming. Tonight, I'll share with you 3 true tales of the horrors that unfold when you step into the wrong room at the wrong time. Trust me, some doors should never be opened. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, or you may find yourself stuck in a room where the only thing you'll be checking out is your sanity.
I was on a solo road trip across the Midwest, running from a breakup and needing some solitude. I had been on the road for almost 18 hours straight and needed some sleep. I thought about pulling into a rest stop and knocking out, but I've heard too many horror stories about them. I decided to pull over to look up the nearest motel. About 10 miles ahead was a motel with a 2-star review. I could care less about reviews at this point. I wasn't expecting a resort out of the middle of nowhere. I just needed sleep. It was a U-shaped 1-level motel with a flickering neon sign that said vacancy. There was a pool to the left side that looked like it hadn't been used in years. I parked in front of the office and got out of the car to look around. It was dark, but I could easily tell this motel was probably the only working establishment in the area. Across the street was an abandoned post office. There were a few other old buildings that looked run down and permanently closed, and that was it. When I walked in the office, there was a ding of bells that rang as I entered. I said hello a few times and rang the desk bell. A tired-looking older man, probably in his late 60s, slowly came out. He was wearing his pajamas and reeked of bourbon. He asked me if I needed a room. I told him yes and let him know I'd be checking out in the morning. He didn't even ask for my ID. I gave him my card and he swiped it on an old credit card machine. It took forever for the payment to process. He handed me my card and a room key that said number 6. Before walking out, I turned around and asked if there was a grocery store nearby. He told me there was a gas station about half a mile up the road and they were open all night. I got into my car and parked at the corner of the building. Number 6 was an end unit. I grabbed my bag out of the back seat that had some toiletries and clothes in it. There was one truck parked across the way and an old station wagon parked 2 spots down from me. Other than that, the motel was empty. When I walked inside the room, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It smelled like cigarette smoke and old linens. The lights were turned off, so I looked around for a light switch on the wall, which was right by the front door. Everything looked clean, just really old. The walls were painted in a pale yellow with 2 wooded picture frames of country landscapes. There was a round table by the front door with 2 chairs and a cigarette holder in the middle. I had no problem staying in motels like this. When I was a kid, we would go on a bunch of road trips, and my dad would always pull off to places like this one. In a way, road trips and even small, dingy motels brought back a lot of fun memories for me as a kid. I guess that's one reason why I just took off after breaking up with my ex-girlfriend. Just looking for that feeling again. I twisted the lock on the doorknob, which was the only one on the door. I decided to take a shower before knocking out and grabbed the bar of soap I had from my bag. When I turned around to head into the bathroom, I realized there was 2 doors. One was open and was obviously the bathroom, and the other, which was in the corner of the room, had a padlock on it. I'm not fond of connecting rooms, but it seemed secure, and there was no one else really here at the motel anyways. After my shower, I laid on the bed for a little bit and watched some TV. I must have fallen asleep about 10 minutes after hitting the bed. I woke up around 2 a.m., feeling parched. My throat felt dry. I needed something to drink. I put some clothes on and looked outside for a vending machine. There wasn't one, which wasn't a surprise. I decided to hop in my car and head to the gas station the clerk said was less than a mile up the road. When I walked in, the place was deserted. I grabbed some Red Bulls, water, jerky, and protein bars for my drive in the morning. The clerk was an older man, friendly enough. He asked me if I was staying down the street. I said yes, and his face expression immediately shifted from friendly to almost skepticism. He said, "Good luck with that." I forced a weird smile and laughed slightly, thinking he was joking. I didn't really know how to respond to that. When I got back to the room, I threw the bag on the table and fell back onto the bed. I started drifting off until I noticed something that made my heart stop. The door, that had the padlock on it, was slightly cracked open. I stood up straight immediately. The lock that was on the door was gone and the latch was open. I started walking to the door. I asked if anyone was there, but it was dead silent. I decided to slowly open the door, which now thinking about it was not one of my best decisions. On the other side was a room, but not another motel room. It was a small room with a bunch of boxes and storage. There was a faint, dim light coming from the inside. I noticed a dirty mattress laid in the corner with a rolled-up blanket and pillow. I said loudly, "Whoever's in here needs to get the hell out now." Still, just silence. And then, in the far left-hand corner, crouched behind a stack of boxes, I saw a shadow moving. My heart started pounding. There was a face piercing around the boxes. It was a man. His face looked greasy, as if he had been working under a car all day. He had long, stringy hair to his shoulders and a deranged expression. It was so dark, the only thing I could clearly make out was the bloodshot color of his eyes staring back at me. He sat there looking at me, not saying one word. He started breathing loudly, so loudly that it sounded like growls from some kind of animal. All of the sudden, he started crawling on all fours and rushing towards me. I immediately shut the door, grabbed my keys and wallet on the table, and ran out the hotel room. I got in my car and rushed out of there as fast as I could. I called the motel when I got on the highway and told the front desk guy everything that happened. He said he was going to call the police, but his tone made me feel like he wasn't going to. He honestly didn't seem like he was shocked about the situation, which makes me wonder if he knew who that guy was. If he did, why did he put me in that room? I decided I'd had enough of the road trip and started making my way back home. I didn't make any stops other than to fuel up at the gas stations. This situation definitely changed my whole perspective on staying at roadside motels. I'm not sure what weird stuff they have going on at that place, but I'm just happy that I'm safe. I've been driving trucks for about 8 years now. Most of my runs are short, just day trips hauling goods between a few states, but every now and then I'll get a long haul. The thing is, my truck doesn't have one of those sleeper cabs in the back. That means I've got to find a bed somewhere, and truck stops with their cheap motels are usually my go-to. If you've ever spent time at a truck stop at night, you know the vibe. The lights buzz, the air smells like diesel and fried food, and there's always a mix of people coming and going. You'll see these women, truck stop girls people call them, hanging around the parking lots or slipping in and out of trucks. They'll approach you sometimes, asking if you want to have some fun. I always pass. Not my thing. There's one truck stop I frequently go to on my longer routes. They have decent showers, okay diner food, and that's where I first noticed her. She's in her 30s, I'd guess. Beautiful in a faded way, like she used to have a lot more life in her. But there's something off. Her gaze is distant, her movements a little jittery, like she's on something or coming off it. I see her almost every time I stop there. She's always sitting in the diner, sipping coffee, staring at nothing. Never eating, never talking. Just there. That night was no different. I pulled in after a long day, grabbed a quick shower, and headed to the diner for a burger. On my way out, I bumped into her, literally. She was standing in the aisle, and I wasn't paying attention. I muttered, "Sorry," and stepped around her. She didn't move, didn't even blink, just stared at me. And then she said something that hit me like a bucket of ice water. She said, "You shouldn't have stopped here tonight." I tried to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking as I paid for my food and got out of there. She was just so weird. Her whole demeanor just gave me the creeps. Across the street, there was a cheap motel. I'd never stayed there before, but it looked clean enough, and I figured a real bed would be better than trying to sleep in my truck. I checked into the room, which was actually a lot nicer than I was expecting. I got myself settled in and laid down on the bed for some shut-eye. I woke up not long after to the sound of a woman crying in the room next door. It was a distant sound at first, but then it grew louder and louder, as if the person was getting closer and closer to the wall behind my bed. The crying didn't stop. After what felt like an hour, I got out of bed and went into the hallway. I knocked on the door to the room next to mine. I knocked and asked if the person in there was okay. No answer. Just more sobbing. It grew louder and louder into a screaming sound. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I went to the front desk to complain, but the clerk, a young guy who looked like he hated his job, didn't really seem to care. He looked down at his computer and said, "There's no one in that room." I told him that there was definitely someone in that room, and I could hear them screaming and crying. He sighed, grabbed some keys from behind him, and walked with me to go and check the room. When he unlocked the door and pushed it open, the room was empty, bed untouched, no luggage, nothing. That's when I started feeling uneasy. My heart started racing a bit. I was more than a little creeped out. The guy looked at me with an "I told you so" kind of expression. I was irritated, tired, and had this disturbing feeling come over me. I locked the door behind me, grabbed my bag, and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen, or hadn't seen. I half expected to hear the crying sound start up again, but it didn't. I just sat there, confused. That's when the phone in my room rang. I stared at it, my gut screaming at me not to answer. But I figured it was probably the young guy at the front desk. Slowly, I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear and said hello. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a woman's voice, cold and unmistakable, whispered on the other end, "I told you shouldn't have come here tonight." I froze. My blood turned to ice. It was her, the woman from the diner. The same flat tone, the same distant sadness in her voice. I slammed the phone down. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my bag, threw on my jacket, and bolted for the door. I didn't even bother to turn off the lights. When I walked up to my truck, I quickly realized that my front left tire had been slashed. On top of that, there was a huge kitchen knife left right beside it. Like whoever did this wanted me to know. Like they wanted me to be scared. I knew right then I was being watched. I looked around me, frantic, with my heart racing, expecting someone to jump me. The place was still. There was nobody around that I could see. I ran over to the front office. There was a handwritten sign on the door that said, "Be back in 15 minutes." I couldn't believe this was happening to me. The truck stop was just across the freeway, but I wasn't going to cross a freeway by foot just to get away from here. I decided to go back inside the motel room and call the police. When I got back inside, I immediately locked the doors and closed all the blinds. I looked around the room, in the closet and shower. I even looked under the bed to make sure nobody was in the room. I dialed 911 from my cell and told the operator that someone has been threatening me and they slashed my tires. They let me know they were sending a squad car and to stay in the room with the doors locked. I sat there at the far end of the room, waiting for something to happen. Aside from the hum of the cars passing on the freeway, it was completely silent. Then out of nowhere, someone started banging at the door. It wasn't a knock. It was a loud bang, as if someone was forcing their body against the door, trying to break into the room. I heard a female's voice yelling, "Let me inside, let me inside." She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding it. I slowly crept to the side of the window, looking out of the crack I could see from the side curtain. There were two shadows in front of my door. One was a man, banging on the door, pushing against it with his whole body, and there she was, the girl from the diner. She was standing right behind him with a demonic smile on her face. Though she was smiling, she was still screaming in rage. The sight alone brought chills throughout my whole body. It was so disturbing. The man finally stopped after a couple minutes, and I heard him say, "Is there a way to get in around back?" I froze and felt paralyzed. Luckily, there was no back door. However, there was a bathroom window, and at this moment, I wasn't even sure it was locked. I saw them both turn and disappear down the hall. I immediately ran to the bathroom and made sure the window was locked. Right then, I saw flashing lights through the curtains. I ran outside right when the police were pulling in. I ran straight to the police car, out of breath and scared out of my mind. That must have made the officer nervous because when he stepped outside of his car, his hand was on his gun. He told me to stay right there and not to move. While trying to catch my breath, I explained to him that I was the one that reported the incident and that the perpetrators ran behind the building. The officers searched the motel inside and out and found nothing. They even got the K9s out to search up and down the forest areas along the freeway. Nobody was ever found. I called roadside assistance for my flat tire, and within a few hours, I was back on the highway, stunned and traumatized with everything that just happened. As I got into my truck and sped out of the parking lot, my mind raced. Why did they target me? What did they want from me? I couldn't stop picturing her face in the diner, those empty, glassy eyes staring through me like she knew something I didn't. I drove through the night without stopping, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When the sun came up, I finally pulled into another truck stop, exhausted but unable to rest. I sat in my cab, sipping cold coffee, trying to piece together what had happened. I stopped driving long hauls entirely after that night. I never returned to that truck stop, never risked seeing her again. But every so often, when I pull into a new truck stop or a motel, I get that creepy sensation all over again. This happened a few years ago, and I'll never forget it. It started when my girlfriend and I were driving back from a weekend in the mountains, taking our time and stopping at little towns on the way. Those kind of mom and pop towns with diners on every corner. Honestly, we were enjoying the trip, but something was off from the start. We decided to pull over to stretch our legs. We walked into a small general store to grab some snacks for the road. It smelled like pine, old leather, and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe old sweat? While I browsed the aisles, my girlfriend, Jenna, lingered near the front, checking out some local trinkets. That's when I saw him. A tall, wiry man with a scruffy beard and sunken eyes was standing near the counter, staring at Jenna like he'd just seen an angel. Or prey. He wore an old dirty baseball cap and a flannel shirt with jeans. Just something about him made my skin crawl. I could faintly hear him talking to her, asking her where she was from, saying, a pretty thing like her should consider staying for a while. I could clearly see she was uncomfortable. Before Jenna could respond, I walked over, putting myself between them. I stood next to her and said to the man, "We're just passing through, man. Thanks." The man's eyes flicked to me. His smile disappeared. For a moment, he just stood there, sizing me up. Then he shrugged and stepped back, but not before muttering something I didn't catch under his breath. Jenna grabbed my arm, and we left the store quickly. Right behind us was the man. As we got in our car, I saw him hop in some old rundown Buick and take off. We got back on the road and drove out of town. A couple of hours later, the sun was setting, and we were both too tired to keep driving. We came across a little motel on the outskirts of a nowhere town. Neither of us were thrilled about staying there, but I assured her it was only for one night. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up as he handed me the key to room 10. The whole place smelled of damp carpet and cheap disinfectant, and the door to our room stuck when I tried to open it. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect. Stained wallpaper, a sagging mattress, and a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in decades. Jenna said she was taking a shower. She seemed irritated and just over the whole trip. While she was in the bathroom, I stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot. My heart started racing as I noticed an old-school brown Buick parked a few spots down from ours. I couldn't remember if the car was already there when we arrived. The parking lot was pretty empty with just a few cars. I'm sure I would have noticed it when we pulled up. Suddenly, I heard a scream from the bathroom. I burst into the bathroom and saw Jenna looking out the small rectangle-shaped window. She said there was a man back there, right outside, looking at her. When I looked out the window, there was no one around. I could hear some rustling of bushes as if someone was running off. I went outside to inspect the back area of the motel, which was full of sticker bushes, beer cans, cigarette butts, and trash. But no one was there. We both came to the conclusion that it could have just been a coincidence. Some guy could have just been back there smoking and heard the window open. Jenna was still shaken, so I stayed up for a while, watching TV on low volume to keep an ear out for anything unusual. Around 3 a.m., a harsh light suddenly pierced through the curtains, lighting up the entire room. We both sat up in bed, shielding our eyes. I peeked outside and saw a car parked directly in front of our room. Its headlights were on full blast, the brights aimed straight at our window. The engine was running, but the car didn't move. I grabbed my phone and keys and went outside to check it out. I walked closer and saw clearly it was the 1980s Buick I saw in the parking lot earlier. The same car I saw that man get into at the store earlier that day. But as I kept getting closer to the car, I realized something was off. The car was empty. There was no one in the driver's seat, no one hiding in the back. The doors were locked, and the car was running. I went back inside, told Jenna to grab her slippers, and we both walked to the front desk. I wasn't leaving her alone in there. It took a while for the manager to appear after ringing the bell over and over. He came from the back looking half asleep, sipping on a cup of coffee. I asked him which guest owned the car with the brights on in front of room 10. The manager walked around the desk and opened the front door, looked in the direction of our room and asked, "What car?" I rushed out the front door, past the manager, almost knocking him down, and was stunned. No car in sight. Jenna and I exchanged looks. I couldn't understand. I'm sure I would have heard it taking off if it moved. But once again, no one was there. I described the car to him and asked if he could check his guest list. He looked irritated and flipped through a logbook. He said there was only 3 rooms booked that night. Us, a family in room 3, and a trucker in room 5. None of them mentioned driving a car like that. We both went back to the room speechless. Neither of us could sleep. At this point, we decided to pack everything up and just keep driving the rest of the way home. We weren't getting any sleep here, and I honestly was just weirded out and fed up with everything that was happening. It took only a few minutes to get everything back in our suitcases. Out of nowhere, the doorknob started rattling as if someone was trying to get in. Jenna and I looked at each other with hesitation. My heart was pounding. I walked over quietly to the door and looked through the peephole, but nobody was there. I shouted loudly, "Who is it?" trying to sound unfazed, but no response. I walked over to the window and slowly pulled the drapes back to scan the parking lot. Suddenly, there he was. The man from the store earlier, standing outside our window. His figure was barely visible in the dim light, but the sickening feeling of recognition was there. He was waiting. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. I don't know what happened to me in that moment, but I was furious and ready to go out to kick his ass. I walked to the door and twisted the doorknob, but it wouldn't open. I tried to stay calm, my mind racing, thinking maybe it was just stuck like before. I checked the lock again. The deadbolt wasn't fully retracting. Something was wrong. I twisted the handle again, my frustrations mounting. Something was blocking it. He must have jammed something inside the deadbolt. And that's when I realized that he locked us in. I went back to the window and saw him standing there, leaning against his car, with a wicked smile across his face. He started waving at us and laughing. He was getting a kick out of this. I tried opening the window and soon realized the window was painted shut. There was no way to open the window without breaking it. I was contemplating grabbing a chair and throwing it through. I told Jenna to call the front desk and let them know what was happening. All this time, the man and I stood frozen, our eyes locked. He flicked his cigarette, turned around, and opened his trunk. It was dark outside, but I could clearly see him grabbing some duct tape and rope out of his trunk. Then, without a slight bit of urgency, he slowly started walking back towards our room. Panic surged through me. I grabbed the chair from the table and wedged it under the doorknob. It wasn't much, but it was something. My mind was running in circles. I looked over at Jenna, who was on the verge of hyperventilating. I ran through my bag, grabbed my Swiss Army knife. All my other tools were in the car. Before I could even think my next thought, I heard something. A sound that cut through the tension. A crack, like a gunshot. I jumped back, my pulse spiking. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a low, gravelly voice. It was the owner of the motel, standing somewhere outside. I rushed to the window, my heart leaping into my throat. There he was. The motel owner, with a rifle slung over his shoulder, heading straight for the stalker, who was still standing there, too close to our room. He shouted, "Get the hell off my property." He was calm, but dead serious. The man looked back at the owner, and for a moment, his eyes flicked to us in the window. That twisted smile spread across his face again, and I could see his brain working, calculating what to do next. But the owner wasn't waiting for him to make a move. The rifle came up, aimed straight at the ground near the man's feet. There was a tense moment of silence. Then, out of nowhere, the guy stepped back, letting the duct tape and rope fall to the ground. He threw his hands up like it was no big deal, turned around, and strolled back to his car as if nothing had just happened. I stood frozen at the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The owner didn't lower his rifle right away. He kept it trained on the man until his car disappeared out of sight. As we waited for the police to arrive, the owner grabbed his tools and was finally able to get the door released. The man had inserted a small piece of wire in the keyhole of the deadbolt, blocking it from retracting. The more we tried to open it, the more jammed it got. Shortly after, the police caught up with the guy at a gas station in the next town over. The part that still haunts me with fear is that when they arrested the guy and searched his car, they discovered a shovel and large amounts of chloroform in his trunk. What his motivation was, why he decided to follow us, or worse, what he thought he was trying to prove by going to such twisted lengths, I'll never understand. All I know is this: whatever he was after, we made it out and got away.
And so, we come to the end of another dark chapter. Comment below which part made your heart race. Was it the trucker, stranded in the dead of night, hearing the haunting cry from beyond the walls? Or perhaps it was the man, silently lurking in the closet, his breath cold and steady, ready to strike when you thought it was safe. Only you know which one twisted your mind. If you wish to tempt fate once more, like and subscribe. I will be waiting for the next tale and for you.